The birds humming their silly trills all morning were annoying. I wanted to get up and disperse them all, to turn up the music so I wouldn't have to hear them sing. Mason was angry because he'd decided to sleep an hour longer tonight, but the birds woke him up. He hated the birds because Schofield's best days as a businessman were associated with them. He's also hated himself for not finding the strength to do the right thing. And who's to say what the right thing was at that time? It had seemed right to him at the time, but now he thought otherwise. He had been younger then, hadn't understood much, but now he was wiser and knew for sure that the mistakes of the past were very hard to undo. It was probably better not to even try. After forcing himself to his feet, the man habitually took a shower, made himself a cup of espresso, and changed his clothes while the coffee cooled. Mason did everything out of habit. Everything he did was already so repetitive that life was like a series of gray weekdays, repeating one another over and over. It was more like Groundhog Day. It was as if you were stuck in a time loop and all the events in your life were painfully familiar. The man knew exactly how his day was going to go, but what happened next knocked him out and shook him up. After habitually leaving his car in the office parking lot, Mason straightened his jacket and walked slowly towards the office building, where a dirty boy came running out to meet him. Never before had beggars come so close to the place, for the business center was under guard. Mason began to look around, for a child of 10 years was not supposed to be begging alone. Though, who would understand these cleverly devised schemes according to which beggars operate, and every time they come up with a new way to get more money out of people? The man wanted to go around the boy, but he wouldn't let him do that, almost throwing himself at Mason's feet. And then Mason decided that if he gave the kid some money, he'd be sure to leave him alone. He put his hands in his pockets, but there was no change, no cash at all, for the man was used to paying for everything with bank cards and only withdrew money as a last resort. "I don't have any money. Go find yourself another victim." Mason frowned in an attempt to brush off the boy. But he wasn't going to give up. He looked at Mason hopefully with hungry eyes, and he didn't dare say anything. The man began to lose patience. On the one hand, he wanted to help the child. He could see that he was hungry. And he hadn't eaten properly for a long time by the looks of it, because his shabby robe was hanging on him like a skeleton. But on the other hand, it wasn't the Mason Charitable Foundation. He already gave a decent sum to foundations every month to help the needy, and no one accounted to him where it was spent. And how could you trust that boy if you gave him money for food, and he took it to whoever was in charge of him? "You're my daddy. Help," the boy whispered confusedly. The man was dumbfounded for a moment, speechless and unsure of what to do. But when he went over the boy's words in his head again, Mason laughed and answered, "Daddy, you must have me confused with someone else, kid." To be honest, Schofield had grown accustomed to having other people's children trying to impose on him. After all, everyone wanted to profit from someone else. And Mason regarded such remarks with irony. Probably the kid had been taught how to try to pity a millionaire, for the boy was threatening a well-known businessman in the city, Mason Schofield, who was hounded everywhere by journalists who couldn't wait to write some compromising article about him. Even now, they must have been around eager to get their cameras and dictaphones ready. How much Mason hated the press. If only they wrote the news on the facts, but no, they turned it upside down and made lies so cleverly that people began to believe them. "Okay, kid, you seem to be overstepping the bounds already," the man stated. Mason grabbed the boy under the arm and dragged him away. He was afraid of breaking something, for the bones were literally clanking against each other. But the boy was wiry, and when he pulled his arm to pull it out, he put up a good fight. There were curious eyes on him and Mason, and the man didn't like it. He was afraid a mother was going to jump out of the bushes and start yelling that her kid was being abused, and that was an article, and I'd have to pay a lot of money to shut them up. He was starting to hurt. Either his blood pressure was spiking, or he was just nervous. Looking at the kid, Mason was ready to stare him down. "What kind of father am I? I don't have kids, and I never have," Mason excused himself. "Mommy said you were my daddy," the boy stammered and began fumbling with his hands in his emaciated pockets. Didn't your mother tell you anything else? That you are aliens living in space, for example? The man said ironically. Look at this here. The boy pulled out a jade ring from his pocket and held it out to the shocked Mason. He would recognize this jewelry even with his eyes closed to the touch, because he made it himself and gave it to the girl he loved. He used to make his own jewelry because he learned it from his grandfather in his youth. But when he got to his father's house, Mason went on a spending spree. He got a taste for money, and it blew his mind. He gave this ring to Emma before the separation, which wasn't supposed to last long, but lasted a lifetime. Come with me, Mason muttered through his teeth, swallowing the lump in his throat, and clenched the ring the boy had given him. Of course, the man could easily have pretended that he hadn't noticed anything unusual, that it was just a piece of jewelry, the kind they sell in the underpasses. But he recognized him, and what if it really was his son? Mason's heart began to beat hard. He looked at the boy walking beside him, and he didn't understand how it was possible to receive a hello from the past after all these years. He had broken up with Emma almost 12 years ago. Sure, he remembered her often, but he would never dare return to her life again. After going along with his father in the pursuit of money and choosing to betray his love, at the time he chose money, and now he had no forgiveness. It was because of breaking up with her, because of the biggest loss of his life, as Mason now thought. The man had hated the bird song because it reminded him of her, the beautiful Emma, the beautiful girl with a light soul and a big, kind heart. They often spent time outdoors on the lake shore, on the porch of the house, walking through the woods and listening to the birds sing there. And when Emma was gone in Mason's life, he hated the chirping, wounded deep into his soul, where all the feelings and memories were buried. On the way to the office, Mason was constantly being stared at with open mouths, as if he'd seen a marvel, and the man was angry and ready to duct tape his eyes shut. He didn't know why he'd messed with the boy, but there was something about the situation that made him want to do this and not the other way around. You assure me that you are my son? Asked Mason, squinting slightly, as he and the boy found themselves in his office. That's right. Mom showed me your pictures. She said only you could help. What about your mother? Suppose it's true, and you're my son. You're a big boy now. Tell me, why has your mother kept quiet all these years and said nothing to me? She was probably afraid. She didn't want to pry into your life. But now something bad has happened. Mom's in jail. I need help. I'm not asking you for money, but help me get my mom out. She said I could ask you for asylum so that they wouldn't take me to the orphanage, but I don't need that. If I have to, I'll go to the orphanage and to jail for my mom. I want to save her. She's had a hard time all these years. Mason collapsed in his chair, his hair standing on his head at what he heard. Emma was imprisoned? The always exemplary girl could not have ended up in prison. Had she changed so much over the years? It seemed like a boy and an adult in front of him. Though, what kind of adult was there? Even though he was making clever speeches, he was just a kid with the strongest fear in his eyes. What's your name, kid? Mason asked. Anthony. Mom said that's what Dad wanted to call me. She never told me anything about you before, didn't tell me where you'd gone, and when the cops came, she had no other choice. She put the ring in my hands and told me to try to get help from you, because we have no one. And I didn't want to go to the orphanage. It would be bad there, and no one would help my mother then. What's your mother's name? Mason was still trying to convince himself that it wasn't his son, despite the many coincidences. Emma. You know her name, the boy frowned. Mom and newspaper clippings where your interview was published. I didn't understand why she collected them all before, but then I realized. I don't know why she was afraid to tell me about you. I wouldn't come without a case if I didn't have to, like now. And what did they put your mother in jail for? He couldn't stop pestering the boy with questions, though he knew he had to think about how he could help. We had a neighbor, Grandma Valerie, who was very ill. At one time, she helped us like no one else. She used to sit with me while my mother was at work. She was like a grandmother to me. Mom worked in a hospital. She had access to medications which are very difficult to get. Anyway, Mom stole the medication that Grandma Valerie needed, and she was convicted. Well, how did she steal? She said that she made a deal, and the cops, they said that the line had to wait, that they'd give it in to her for free. And how long to wait if the poor old lady was dying of pain? They took Valerie's grandmother to the hospital. They took her under special control, but she was going to die soon, and I don't know how to get my mother out. I wish I had the money to bribe someone. As you say, Mason hummed. You're too young to bribe anybody. But I'm a real man, Anthony said indignantly. Don't look at me for being small. I'd do anything for my mother. It suddenly seemed to Mason that he was not talking to a child at the moment, but to an established adult. The boy sounded like an adult, even though by Mason's approximate calculations, he was 11 years old. Okay, let's figure out a way to get your mom out of jail. She shouldn't go to jail for something like that. Well, if we have to, we'll bribe the cops, the man said confidently. I don't have any money, Anthony said. Only the ring. But my mother strictly forbade me to sell it for nothing, saying that only if my life is threatened and you refuse to help. And otherwise she asked me to save the thing that was dear to her heart. Mason's heart clenched, that nasty, suffocating lump in his throat again. It was hard for the man to think of the past, where he had been so happy but had left everything behind. How his life would be now if he had chosen the woman he loved then over money. He probably would have worked in a firm somewhere, or maybe become a farmer. Who knows? There's no telling what it would have been like. If. And Emma didn't forget about him. She took care of the ring. So she loved him, not hated him. Or maybe she did the opposite. Maybe she wanted to throw the ring in his face one day and accuse him of everything and say all the things that she had been accumulating inside of herself for years. Calling the secretary, Mason ordered her to order clothes for the boy and also to quickly feed him something nourishing and healthy while the man himself was in a meeting. Mason strongly advised Anthony not to leave the office unless he wanted to get into some trouble, and he told the secretary that she was now responsible for the boy and that if he disappeared, the punishment would be severe. During the meeting, Mason could think of no one and nothing but Emma. She was always too kind and selfless, always doing more for others than anyone else did for her. She was a real angel, and still is. Determined to get the woman out at any cost, Mason dreaded to think what would happen to them next. He didn't expect Emma to welcome him with open arms. I wanted to ask the boy if he hadn't had a daddy all this time. Had Emma lived all these years raising her son alone? But it was a shame to ask a child such questions. He's still young, though he tries to seem mature and independent. After the meeting, Mason returned to his office where a well-fed boy was waiting for him. But there was no smile on his face, only sorrow, because Anthony longed for his mother, even though his mother always considered him a child, but Anthony tried to help her. And in the small dacha village where they lived, he always found a part-time job. The boy would bring his mother flowers or buy her a chocolate bar. Anthony liked to pamper his mother at least a little, to see a smile light up on her face. Of course, she scolded her son and said that he was too young to earn money, but she also praised him for his independence. Since Emma didn't have any family, she was most afraid that they would take her son away from her and take him to an orphanage. Therefore, she tried to earn as much money as possible to pay off the debts that she had borrowed when Anthony was small and often ill. Emma worked hard for her son, and Grandma Valerie was the only person who ever helped them. Anthony understood how difficult it was for his mother to take that step. She agonized, tormented herself with doubts, and he also knew that she had been set up. He saw in his mother's distorted face how surprised she was when the police told her that she had stolen many ampules of medicine. "I only took one to help a man. You're crazy. Why do I need so many?" sobbed Emma. "And who knows, maybe you sell to drug dealers. Anyway, you're going to jail now for a long time," the cops told her. Anthony at the time was hiding, shaking and afraid of being spotted. And the mother, before opening the door to the police, gave her son instructions on how and what to do if she was taken away. And now the boy was very worried, afraid to even think about what would become of his mother. Of course, she was afraid to take the step because of her son. She was afraid that they would take him into an orphanage. But she could not leave her grandmother to die in agony. She wanted to help her at least a little, to ease her suffering. How Emma felt now, not even knowing what had become of her son. Had Anthony managed to escape and had gotten to his father? Surely his mother was losing her mind, and Anthony wanted to confront her sooner than later. Mason called a good friend of his and asked him for information on where Emma had been taken and how bad it was, while he tried to distract himself with business, completely ignoring the presence of his own son in the office. Why should he be sure that it was actually his child? What if Emma had given birth to someone else's child? Only now, looking at the boy, Mason noticed a certain resemblance to himself as a child. It was like looking at an old photo album. An acquaintance soon called back and named a round sum that would outweigh what had already been paid for by fabricating the case. It turned out that the head doctor of the hospital where Emma worked had wanted to frame the girl for a long time, and he took advantage of her little mistake to get rid of this too correct girl, who always tried to get justice in everything. Without a second's hesitation, Mason transferred the money and got ready to go. By that time, they had brought clothes for Anthony, and the man told him to change. He did not pay any attention to the slanting glances of his subordinates. He decided that now he would pick Emma up from the detention center, take her and Anthony home, and that would be the end of the story with his son. However, as soon as he saw the girl from the past, his head began to spin. The events that had brought many pleasant and memorable moments were flooding in, and it was hard to cope with them. Emma didn't dare look at Mason and thanked him for his help. She said that she would be sure to thank him, but the man needed no thanks. The only thing he frantically wanted was to talk to Emma, and that's what he asked her to do. Just one conversation. After bringing her and the boy home, Mason decided that Emma and the baby were definitely not going to live there. He wanted to take over and buy them a new place to live. All that remained was to convince Emma to accept such a modest gift and not to think that he was trying to atone for his sins in this way. Mason was sure he could do it, even if not immediately. Emma tells Mason that the head doctor who set her up has been courting her for years, trying to get her to have sex with him, despite the fact that he already has a wife and children. Of course, Emma refused, for which the man promised to take vicious revenge on her one day, to hurt her when she wouldn't even expect it. I didn't steal the medication. It took me a long time to get permission, and eventually they let me take one vial, but it turned out to be a trap. I don't know what I would have done if it weren't for you. You helped me and Anthony out, the woman thanked Mason. Why didn't you tell me before that I had a baby? Asked Mason with resentment in his voice. He certainly had no reason to be offended by Emma, because he was guilty of a lot of things in front of her. Emma was silent for a while, as if trying to collect her thoughts, to find the right words, and then she looked at Mason sadly and answered, I tried. I found your address in the city and came to tell you I was pregnant, but your father kicked me out. He told me you were getting married, and then the news of the wedding broke. What was I supposed to do? You didn't want to get in touch, did not tell me anything about the fact that he was going to marry someone else, and I was waiting for you. It was an arranged marriage. We divorced a few months after the merger. Mason tried to justify himself. I know I'm unforgivable, but I really wish you could find it in yourself to forgive me. My father didn't tell me anything about the baby. I didn't know. But that doesn't diminish my guilt one bit. Mason got to his feet and said goodbye to Emma, and left knowing that they both needed time. He needed to get used to the idea of having a son, and Emma needed to think things over, to decide if she was ready to trust the man who had once betrayed her. Mason knew that he would do anything now to make this woman happy, but he doubted that she would ever trust him again. The man began to visit his ex-fiancée and son often with gifts, and one day the boy called him in for a serious talk. You stopped torturing Mother. Thank you for helping, but you need to make up your mind. Either ask her forgiveness normally and live together, or stop just coming here. Mom cries every time after your visits. She still suffers. I can't watch her suffering. That's not why I came for you to help. Mason was proud of his son, bright and brave beyond his years. He made up his mind to talk to Emma. The woman found the strength to forgive the man and let go of all the wrongs, stepping from the past to the present. Across the great chasm that had once divided them, Emma and her son moved into Mason's home. Anthony was transferred to a private grammar school where he could do well and develop all his abilities. The newspapers continued to write articles about how the millionaire had picked up a homeless boy and recognized him as his son. Journalists tried to smear Mason at the behest of competitors, but they didn't get any benefit out of it because the man didn't fall for the provocation. It was Mason's father who gave credence to the journalists' opinions, but he had not been alive for several years. One day, Mason decided to go for an interview where he'd spoke honestly about the past, bad decisions, and his mistakes, hoping that someone would follow his advice and not make mistakes. The chief physician at the hospital where Emma worked was punished. Mason tried to make the man bitterly regret what he had done and to remember for the rest of his life that it was wrong to act in such an inhuman way. Grandma Valerie lived out the rest of her days in a better place where she was cared for and relieved of her pain. Emma was grateful to Mason for taking care of that woman. She saw the man had changed, which is why she forgave him.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.